Guys, first video, so I'm just going to be eating my steak and eggs and fruit and just talking about the function of proteins in our diet and what they do. So if you're eating a steak or if you're eating anything and you want to watch this and learn something about nutrition, let's go. Okay, so how does our body actually get proteins? What are proteins? Well, proteins are long polypeptide chains made from molecules named amino acids. So where do we actually get the amino acids? Well, the amino acids is what we're actually trying to get from the protein we eat. We get a construction set, for example, a steak, break it down into individual blocks, and then rebuild a set that we want. So in this case, a Lego piece is an amino acid. So we ingest proteins, we break them down into amino acids, and then use those amino acids to make our own proteins. Right, so what do we actually do with the amino acids? Well, there's a number of different functions that proteins make in our body. Starting off, enzymes. So enzymes are, as we know, like biological catalysts. So they speed up reactions without being used up themselves, and they're all proteins. So for example, maltase, what breaks down maltose into glucose, into 2-alpha glucose molecules, that's also protein. So funnily enough, you need proteins to break down carbohydrates. Lipases, so enzymes that break down lipids, are also proteins. So you also need proteins to break down lipids. So enzymes obviously have a massive variety. So enzymes are everywhere. Enzymes speed up everything, even like Rubisco, which is an enzyme involved in, what is it? I think photosynthesis. That's also, I mean, we obviously don't photosynthesize, but that's something to think about. So even proteases, which are enzymes that break down proteins into amino acids, are proteins. So you need amino acids to build proteins, to digest proteins, to make amino acids to build proteins. The other thing about biology is kind of all a cycle. It's all a cycle. Things kind of work one for another, and they all go in a cycle. All right, next up, we have structural proteins. So proteins are used in a number of structural functions. For example, I think keratin, which is, I think, what builds up your like nails and your hair. That's also a protein. So if you want to stay together, if you want to stay strong, there's proteins that are responsible for building ligaments, bones. So proteins are all over the place to keep things together. So if you want to stay healthy, if you want to have a healthy body, if you want to be able to move around for longer, obviously you need proteins in order to keep your connective tissues in order. Okay, next up we have hormonal proteins. So some of the hormones are also proteins. For example, glucagon and insulin, which are the two key hormones that regulate your blood sugar, are also polypeptides made out of amino acids. So if you want to regulate your blood sugar, you need to have proteins in your diet in order to get amino acids. Right. Next up, we have muscular proteins. So everyone knows you need to eat protein to build up your muscles. But what are the tissues that actually make your muscles? Well, long story short, there's two main muscle kind of tissue, let's say, fibers, myosin and actin. And what happens is the thick protein, which is myosin, binds a phosphate head to actin, which is the thin protein, and pulls it along, and that causes your muscle to contract. So in order to build your muscles, obviously in order to build your myosin and actin, you also need proteins, you also need amino acids. That's the building blocks of muscle. So that's obviously what actually happens in the muscle. Next up, we have carrier and transport proteins. So obviously all the transport that happens in your cells is mostly responsible, proteins are mostly responsible for it. So yes, there's osmosis, yes, there's diffusion, but all active transport and all transport against the concentration gradient happens by proteins. So there's channel proteins and carrier proteins, and that's just everywhere. Like every tissue, every part of your body uses transport in some way. So your brain, for example, uses carrier proteins to transport sodium and potassium ions across the neuron membranes to establish a gradient in order then to generate an action potential, which is a firing of a neuron. Your stomach, your ileum uses active transport to create sodium concentration gradients to co-transport glucose. So again, that's absorption of amino acids and carbohydrates with proteins which are made from amino acids. My steak is almost running out, so last thing where proteins are used is making other proteins. So proteins are made in the process of translation from mRNA, and that happens in the cell, and ribosomes are used for that. So a ribosome consists of two proteins, and an mRNA strand goes through, and new amino acids are joined together. And ribosomes are also protein. So in order to make a protein, you need proteins to break down proteins, you need proteins to transport proteins, you need proteins to make proteins, and then you need proteins to fold those proteins. So proteins kind of do everything. They do lots of things in our body, and it's really fascinating. But the main thing, obviously, you have to remember that you ingest proteins, you break them down into amino acids, and then our body uses those amino acids for its own purposes. That's why having sufficient protein in your diet is really important, because your body cannot function without it. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm going to finish my steak.